Well, let's get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today. We'll be focusing on how we can solve this huge headache that GDPR can be with the help of Bullhorn automation. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. The microphones are disabled for everyone, but if you do have any questions, we encourage you to ask as many as you possibly can in the Q&A. We want this to be an interactive session, and we'll aim to answer those questions either through the webinar as we go along or towards the end in the Q&A session. This is also going to be recorded, so a copy of it will be sent to everyone in the next 24 hours. Starting off with a bit of an introduction from everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Eric Mativ. I'm the Sales and Strategy Specialist here at Bullhorn, and I look after all the automation and AI products, with Herefish being one of them and what we'll be exploring today. I'm joined by Liam Ryan and Jordan Hamilton, who introduce themselves next. Guys, over to you.
Hi guys, Liam Ryan here. I'm Product Marketing Manager for Automation and AI, and my main responsibilities around our market strategy in relation to those two.
Hi there, my name is Jordan Hamilton. I'm a solution consultant here at Bullhorn. I'll be running the demo today, and I'm here from more of a product perspective. So I run all the demos around all the products, and I'm here to show you how we can help you with GDPR using Herefish.
Nice, thanks guys. Okay, so in terms of agenda, we understand that there are a few of you who are still relatively new to the automation world in recruitment, and some of you haven't started adopting automation to your business yet. So before we dive into GDPR, we'll do a quick introduction into Bullhorn automation, just to understand what it is, what it does, the key areas in which it can help your businesses. And then we'll hand it over to Liam, who will do a deeper dive into GDPR, what it looks like both before and what it could look like after automation. Jordan will then take over with a demo, and that should leave us with 5 to 10 minutes for a final recap and Q&A. So Bullhorn Recruitment Automation, also known as Herefish, is designed to help you improve your internal processes and external engagement at scale, leading to higher productivity for your team internally, creating a greater experience externally for your candidates and clients, and a healthier and more accurate database. When you think about automation in recruitment more specifically, there are really 3 core areas of focus, 3 main questions you should be asking yourselves as a business. How can I make my team more productive? How can I provide the best experience for everyone that engages with my business, both candidates and clients? And how can I make sure that my data gets cleaned and stays clean as I continue to grow my business? And those are also the 3 core pillars that we built Herefish around. So we're going to dive into each of these in a little bit more detail, starting with productivity. When we refer to productivity, it's really about the admin side, right? Think about all these little tasks, repetitive actions that a consultant has to go through every day. Things like checking emails, updating multiple fields against a record on Bullhorn, writing notes against those records. Or maybe it's just about creating tasks for themselves and sending reminders to perform an action on a later date. Now, when you add up all these little things together, that's a lot of admin time that a consultant needs to go through every day. And that's time that can be better spent elsewhere, right? And this is where automation comes into play. Not only can take all that effort away from your consultants and automate it in the background, but most importantly is giving them back that valuable time that they can now spend on other things, like building more relationships with more customers, more candidates, create more opportunities, and potentially bring you in more business. And for one of our customers, Pioneer Selection, that was exactly what happened. Focusing on productivity brought tremendous success because Herefish is currently doing roughly 500,000 actions in the background for their business. So that's typically 500,000 actions that a consultant would typically have to do themselves. Time and resources that a human being will have to put in, that are now being run in the background through automation. And when we think about experience, it's all about communication, right? It's about consistently communicating with our target audience, doing so at the right time, and ensuring there are no gaps in that communication as well. We could be talking about advanced marketing campaigns, where we're building out HTML-rich emails that we want to push out to our candidates or our clients to build up your engagement with them and strengthen your brand. But it can also be the simple stuff that can be very impactful for your business. Things like recurring check-in emails with your clients and candidates, or engaging with your candidates throughout their entire recruitment journey, such as acknowledging their applications, proactively notifying them as they're progressing further in the recruitment process. And as we're approaching the interview stage, we want to start notifying them and reminding them of the upcoming interviews and follow up with them straight after to get that feedback, both from them and maybe from the client as well. And when we think about the post-placement journey for that candidate, a process that is very often forgotten by the recruiter, we can leverage automation to consistently communicate with that candidate both before and after their start date with that new placement, to not only provide a great experience that we want them to go through as a business, but also leverage this functionality so we can start increasing things like our NPS feedback, the reviews that we're getting as a business, referrals that we might be receiving from the candidate. Providing that consistent experience can all lead up to you strategically bringing in more business. And that's not only on the permanent side, of course, we can do the same thing for the redeployment. Think about engagement campaigns for your candidates that might be coming close to the end of their contract. Herefish can start engaging with them in the background. So not only it's providing that great experience for the candidate, but it's also taking a huge effort away from your consultants when it comes to redeploying candidates. And another very useful use case from one of our other clients, the Connexus Group, was, again, implementing a very simple automation that brought tremendous results from the very early days. And that was a simple campaign that was designed to engage with all new leads added to the system where a consultant wasn't able to connect with on their first try. And last but not least, that's probably the most important of all the pillars, data health. In order for your team to be most productive and for you to provide the best experience for everyone, the data that you work with needs to be clean and accurate, right? And there are a lot of things that we can do when it comes to data automation. We could be doing things like copying data from one field to another. Great use case here would be the end date of a contract placement being copied into the availability date of the candidate. So the next time we do run that search, we know when they're next available for work. Or we could be updating fields or setting statuses in Bullhorn through automation based on certain behavior in the system or your own internal business rules. Or we could be clearing data that is no longer relevant for your business or might be outdated. And when it comes to refreshing that database, we can get that up-to-date information straight from the source by leveraging what we call surveys. To get that up-to-date email address, that up-to-date phone number, that up-to-date CV straight from the candidate and have that parsed back into the Bullhorn system, so we're always working with fresh data without the consultant having to get involved. And of course, that also includes the big topic for today, GDPR, that can be automated with the help of data automations through Herefish. And that was a big win for one of our other customers, the team over at Astute Technical, who now can't even remember what GDPR process looked like before they had automation in their business. And now, as I'm handing it over to Liam, just a quick disclaimer for everyone. We're not providing legal advice in this webinar. This is purely technical information. All the information that we're sharing is publicly available as well. And if you're unsure on any legal obligations that you might have as a business, please seek qualified legal advice for that. And we can assist on the technical elements. Liam, over to you.
Super, thanks, Eric. Hi, everybody. So I'm going to run through a brief recap of GDPR, if that's possible. And then I'm going to be looking at two key focus areas that are important to recruiters, and they really are the focus of our demonstration into how automation can assist you with your GDPR compliance. One thing I will say, following on from the disclaimer, is that using automation alone will not prove your GDPR compliance. It's much bigger than that, and really it relates to how you operate as a business. What automation will do is it will support your journey to compliance in the most efficient way possible, and it will also help you to provide the best experience possible for your clients and your candidates. So let's get started. Ultimately, the purpose of GDPR is to protect the privacy of individuals and their personally identifiable data. And whilst this can be seen as another hoop to jump through for your business, we are in the modern age of digital experiences, and the average user expects levels of protection and privacy from all of their experiences that they have online and through other e-media purposes. So we should be seeing this as an opportunity to provide that great experience and meet the expectations of our clients and our candidates, and automation can certainly help with this. Furthermore, there are two main types of entity when processing personal data. There are data processors and data controllers. Recruiters who decide to store and process candidate information are controllers. So to be clear on that, if you are making a decision to obtain data and process that data, you are a data controller. And that's important because both of these slightly differ in the requirements from a GDPR compliance perspective, but both are required to follow the accountability framework, and this dictates your responsibility to comply. And everybody on this call should be aware of that. So if you're not aware of the accountability framework, go on the ICO website or look up that accountability framework, because it's very important. Now we have the two main areas that we're going to be focusing on in terms of automation, and that's the processing of data, the basis for processing data, and the gaining of consent for marketing purposes. As part of GDPR, companies must store why they are processing an individual's data and keep it up to date. And they must be able to provide that information on request and also prove an audit trail of compliance. You need to prove that you're keeping those processing bases up to date and any changes in those process basis. So specifically, these processing bases are consent. So an individual is given clear consent for you to obtain and process their data. A contract, so whether you have a contract with a client or with a candidate, depending on the nature of your agency. Legal obligation, so you've got a legal obligation for processing that data. Vital interests. So this is where it could be something in terms of jeopardy of someone's life. So it's vital that you have that data on them. A public task, which is more for your legal basis and government basis. And then legitimate interest, that I'm sure a lot of people will be aware of, which is that you process and obtain that data because the individual has a legitimate interest in your business, and you can prove with reasoning that they would have a legitimate interest within your business. And really, consent, contract, and legitimate interest are the three focus areas that most businesses will have. And then finally, marketing consent. And this is required to be stored on whether and how an individual would like to receive marketing. So in the digital world, consent is required before outreach is made. So whether that's email, whether that's SMS, whether that's cookies on your website, any digital channel across all of those, you need to have consent from the individual prior to sending marketing to them. The only outreach permitted to individuals is via phone, and you must provide evidence that you've checked the TPS register. So if there's someone on a TPS register, you can't make a phone call to them either. But obviously, if they're not on the TPS register, you are able to make that phone call and then obviously ask for the appropriate consent on the other digital means of marketing to them. And then finally, the ICO has the power to fine up to $500,000 in worth. And the reality is that shouldn't be the only reason to comply with GDPR. We should be looking at the modern age of data and how people use their data, and use this as an opportunity really to provide that experience and that expertise as well in terms of data savviness for our candidates and our clients, because those that don't receive a good experience from you are less likely to engage and less likely to trust you as an organization. So moving forward, we've just discovered that there are two elements that we need to focus on and that present a challenge to recruiters, and these need to be tackled in one shape or form. So firstly, obtaining and maintaining marketing consent. This is obviously especially important for those recruiters who are identifying and reaching out regularly to new individuals that we should all be doing as part of our business growth strategies. The challenges here are to keep and maintain a healthy database of up-to-date information and ensure that contact methods adhere to the preferences of the individual. Able to do this, recruiters need to capture and maintain this information on an ongoing basis, and this is vitally important. You need to make sure your database is clean, but most importantly, the preferences of each individual that you have are updated, so that when you do reach out to them, you're reaching out in the way that they would like you to, and through the method that they would like you to. And the impact of doing this is really sort of derogatory on the agency. So you can result in poor experiences for your company. As we've already said, it could be a lack of trust in your organization as well. And if it's done at scale, there's lots of examples out there where reputational damage can happen if it's done on a scaled basis. And the next challenge is to comply via maintaining your processing justifications. So again, a key element here is to keep your records up to date on your processing basis. So why have you got that data? You need to also prove why you've selected that basis and dates of when you've last reviewed that and why it might have changed in any way. So an example here might be that you had somebody at legitimate interest stage or as a basis, and then they became a client of yours or they contracted to you. That would then be a consent basis that needs to be updated and changed. And this is really important to adhere to this, to adhere to those individual rights of the actual individual. So the key thing here is that they can actually request what data you have stored, why you have it stored, and you must be able to prove with accuracy what data you have, why you have it, and also provide it in a timely manner. So those are the two key main challenges for recruiters that we're going to be covering. How can automation help? So in terms of automation, it can significantly help you to streamline and maintain an efficient process to approaching those two covered challenges that we've just discussed. If you look at the scenario without automation, even looking at any compliance issue, especially GDPR, it's complex. You need to be building processes, you need to be maintaining them. And often as part of GDPR, there'll be multiple touch points, multiple individuals, and multiple different data points that you need to be capturing and updating. And this can be manual and slow if you're relying on your employees or human interaction or intervention to be able to capture that data and obviously maintain and record it. And it's also difficult to track and monitor. We're all busy people. If someone has a conversation with somebody and goes through the consent and how they would like to be contacted, then they go away and have another phone call. That consent isn't actually recorded properly. And then you get a knock-on effect there where data is either out of sync, not captured at all, or is not done at the right time. And that then knocks on to auditable proof becomes difficult. Because we don't know what's actually happened with regards to whether that data has been attained or not. So what happens with regards to automation? Well, automation can help you standardize those collection points. So it helps you to define where you're going to be collecting that information and also incorporate processes around how you collect and maintain that data. You're also able to collect data on your users' terms. So whether that's being through SMS, through email, through your website, Bullhorn Automation helps you to collect data any touch point that's the preference of the individual, and also provides clear audit trails in terms of linkage back to your database or your ATS, where that was actually captured, when it was captured, and what data was captured. And most importantly, it removes the manual burden on your recruiters or your individual employees as an organization. Mainly, they don't have to remember to do these types of things, but also it doesn't take them away from their day job. It doesn't take them away from actually doing the things that they're there to do and the value that they add to your business. So that is a snapshot of how automation can help with these challenges and a brief overview of GDPR. I'll now pass you on to Jordan, who will show you some of these automations in action.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Liam. Before we dive into the product, I'm just going to share one or two more slides in terms of an agenda of what I'll be showing you today. And to start us off, I think we need to start with the key principle of really what is automation. When it comes to automation within Bullhorn, the main principle behind it is, of course, if this, then that. And whenever you think of some sort of data point within Bullhorn, be it in this case, GDPR being required or a new candidate being added, we can then, of course, trigger off either one or a variety of actions to follow through with that. Alternatively, if you're not currently using Bullhorn's automation platform or Herefish, this can also be applied to other parts of the recruitment process too. And that's definitely a conversation that I encourage you to have with your account manager. But looking at things like the recruitment process, interview follow-ups, placement confirmations, and so on, we can apply the same logic to it and provide you with some fantastic results. But again, in this particular case, we're all focusing on GDPR, and there's three main areas I want to talk you through. The first of which, of course, is legitimate interest. How can we log that correctly against a record? And how do we create that audit trail that Lee introduced? Secondly, we'll talk about how we can actually capture consent. How can we give candidates the option to opt in or even opt out? And what does that look like as it comes back into Bullhorn? And the third part there, of course, is how do we maintain it? It's all well and good going out to our entire candidate database and capturing thousands of consent records, but what do we do with it then? Again, in some countries and legislations, it does actually expire. So what does that process look like? And how can we manage that within the platform today? I'm going to hop into Bullhorn, have a look at a few bits of product, and also look at this from a few different lenses. The first of which is going to be from an internal side, but I also want to show you what this all looks like from the candidate's perspective as well. From within Herefish, we've got a few main options to start us off on this journey. Now, again, the first area I want to talk about is, of course, that legitimate business interest section, whereby we can start to then capture different types of consent from people and log that underneath the consent object in Bullhorn, all, of course, automatically. Now, I'm showing quite a simplified version of this today, but mainly in any sort of new candidate management automation, is what we have here. As a part of your normal automations, you can add in a step here to actually set consent automatically. And again, this could be based off various filters in your automation enrollment, such as the source of an application or how it was added. Again, so you can filter who you want to be getting this legitimate interest. Again, you as a business may have the stance that if you apply to a job on our website, that is, you are legitimately interested in our business, therefore we have your consent. However, if you come from a job board and you're speculatively applying, maybe that won't apply. And we're going to send you a survey for us to capture that information directly from you. So you have that flexibility in the platform. But in terms of today's demo, I'm just going to keep it nice and generic. The first option here is, of course, to update the candidate and set the consent automatically. Now, this can be done immediately, and we can also then click into that and update what that actually means. And this is, again, when we can capture things like the purposes, the source, add things like notes and information, and we're effectively adding a data point into the Bullhorn system, which I'll show you shortly. As you can see here, Fish gives you quite a lot of control in terms of how you're looking to add this candidate into the system, whereby we can say if we want to either set or perhaps even remove consent at this point, and of course, then providing us an area whereby we can push this directly against a candidate's record. Now with consent in Bullhorn, of course, there's a sub-object underneath the candidate for you to capture that, allowing you to have multiple types of consent too. So you might have one piece of consent, which is legitimate interest, one for marketing, one for SMS, one for LinkedIn, that sort of thing. You can capture all those different values in the system without it being a kind of like a mess in your notes section, basically. But in here, as you can see, you can choose a number of values. This, of course, is the area which we're going to send it back to. And this is, of course, going to be our consent object. And then below that, we also then have the legal basis. And in this case, it's all around legitimate interest, but you can actually choose what you want that to be. And this really comes into its own when we talk about capturing consent or express consent from a candidate through a survey. And again, we'll talk about that shortly. Below that, you then have the source. You can capture, of course, how you capture that information. And if you ever need to view that or report on it later on, of course, you can. And then, of course, your purposes. Now, all of these values are actually going to pull from what you have set up in Bullhorn. So again, if you're looking at that saying, oh, we don't do email marketing, for example, that's fine. It doesn't have to be an option in there. It's going to reflect what you have in Bullhorn. And again, it could be different names of things, translations, different spelling, whatever it may be. It will reflect what you already have in Bullhorn. So it's not going to be a separate bit of information, a separate system. It's going to tie in directly with what you already have today. And then, of course, you can capture notes around that. In this case, we're just indicating that this was captured via Herefish or it was added via Herefish. Again, if you're capturing this manually today and adding those notes yourself, of course, you can continue to do that, but I'd recommend automating it. Now, what does that look like? Well, if I head over to a candidate record, we can see underneath the consent object here, I have this list, and this is being appended to consistently. But as you can see, we have a few different types of consent in this case. And this, again, comes back to Liam's point where we need that audit trail. We have things like the purpose, the legal basis, the dates associated with that consent request, and of course the answer to that, and any notes around that. So again, you can see if it's being captured via Herefish or through automation, or if, for example, they're opting out or maybe ignoring our requests. So we can visualize that for you in a particular record. And if you needed to view that, if you needed to pull that out of Bullhorn, if you needed to amend that, of course, you always can. But Herefish is doing the heavy lifting for you in this particular case by adding it in automatically as those candidates come through. Now, the other side of capturing consent is, of course, that express consent area where we want to actually ask a candidate, hey, can we store you on the system? Can we email you in terms of recruiting or marketing activity? Or again, whatever those questions may be. You can see in this particular automation, we're capturing it and just adding it into Bullhorn. However, you might add in some GDPR style questions into your new candidate email that's going out. So again, as a candidate's applying to a job or they're being added onto the system, perhaps as a referral, we can have Herefish start engaging with them. And this is when we can really start to talk about how automation can provide that incredible candidate experience. But part of that, and part of adding a survey in front of those candidates and providing questions for them to answer, may be having them drop in their consent preferences. I'm going to look at what that looks like from a candidate's perspective and then talk to you about how we built that out. And again, if I jump into my candidate's inbox here, we might have a welcome email that just says, in this case, hi, James, welcome to Acme Recruiters. You've been referred, or thanks for your application. Before we really continue, would you mind confirming your details? Again, I'm sure we've all signed up to things online. We've all received an email like this. It's a very natural sort of next step for a candidate that applies to a job. And we get a big blue button there to, of course, confirm their details. As a consultant, this tells me a few things. Not only do I know that the candidate's engaged, but I also know that that's a valid email address. And of course, with all of these different action points that are taking place, we're capturing time and date information around this particular candidate too, so that later on, when we're maintaining consent and all those sorts of other variables, we have dates to go off. But again, as a candidate, they might go ahead and click on that particular button there. That's going to take them into what we call a survey. And a survey is effectively just a way of putting some questions in front of a candidate. Now, in this case, we might tie this into sort of like a pre-screen survey. And again, as I mentioned, I'm going to talk to you about how you can build these out, but you can actually create your own surveys with your own questions. And the great thing about surveys is that all of these answers are going to flow back into Bullhorn. But as Eric mentioned before, specifically into the fields in Bullhorn that your consultants are searching for. So again, in this case, if we're capturing things like employment preferences, are you perm, are you contract, what's the best phone number to contact you on, what's your notice period, some other questions that might be coming up these days are you willing to relocate, would you consider working in an office, those sorts of things. If you want those answers from candidates, why not just have them answer them at this point rather than getting on the phone and doing it. But as you scroll through these surveys, as you can see, I can start to put in questions toward the bottom or even at the top if you'd like, around capturing details from the consent side of things. So do you want to hear from us in terms of recruiting activity, marketing activity? Are you okay for us to SMS you? All those sorts of questions, of course, can be added into this survey, and you can build these out however you like. Now, from a candidate's perspective, all they're doing is clicking on yes or no, and of course, hopefully yes. But what does that mean for you, and how does that come back into Bullhorn, I think is the most important question here. And as we head to the back end of this survey, you can see you can actually build out these experiences however you like. This is an example of a GDPR survey that we've got built on our system. And you can see at the top, I've got some stats around how many times it's been sent out, what the open rate is, and of course, some numbers there around how many times it's been completed. Of course, with the demo environment, the numbers can be a little bit funny, but you will have that visibility in terms of the adoption of this particular tool and the survey itself. So you can, again, see if you like the strategy, if you want to change it a little bit, maybe adjust some of the wording, for example. But within here, again, we have these particular questions, which is what we saw before. So would you like to hear from us in terms of recruiting activity or marketing activity, that sort of thing? As we click into them, this is when you can, again, start to get quite detailed. And based on a candidate just clicking on yes, we can translate that yes into quite a lot more actionable information back in Bullhorn. So again, we're writing that back into the consent field in Bullhorn, into the consent object. If they click on yes, we're going to log that as express consent from a particular source. And again, we can choose that to be email or other or survey, whatever it may be, for the purpose of recruiting. And of course, you can change what that value is. If them clicking yes actually means direct mail and recruiting and LinkedIn, for example, you can specify that. And of course, any other notes you'd like. If they say no, of course, you can do the opposite of that. So again, you can revoke that consent for recruiting, and that's going to be logged via Herefish. And again, those are all going to be transactional items that are available in that consent object. And of course, our date and time stamped. And as I mentioned before, in some countries, for example, that consent only lasts 12 months. So you're going to need to follow up on that, in a year, for example. Now, in terms of that journey all around capturing and maintaining consent, again, this might be a part of just a normal kind of candidate welcome email. We also have some automations which can help with that. So again, if I head into the automation section in Bullhorn, you can see I've got 3 automations which we're kind of talking about today. The first of which is going to be the new candidate management side. And that's, again, when we can maybe send out a pre-screen survey, get some GDPR questions in front of them. If that's not a process that you want us to run with your business, it can be quite a bit simpler as well. These 2 automations for candidate consent, both capture and maintain, are available as what we call a blueprint. So again, if you're new to Herefish, or maybe you sign up with Herefish a little bit later on and you forget exactly what I chose, underneath the add automation section in our process part, we've actually created this as a template. So again, if you use Herefish today and you think this looks great, you can actually go turn it on right now. It's all more or less built out for you. You can just apply your own little secret sauce to it. What we've done is created this as a blueprint so you can get up to speed with automation, or GDPR, I should say, as quickly as possible, and hopefully extract some value from the product in that sense. But what we've got today are, of course, these 2 automations that allow you to very quickly and easily capture and maintain your consent. Now, in terms of capturing, this is, of course, coming back to what we saw before. Quite a lot of records on your database probably don't have consent, and this might be quite a large undertaking currently to get everyone consenting to your information in the system. In this case, what we have is all the candidates in the system without consent. And again, you can apply your own filters to that. So maybe you might want to do like a data cleanse before this, but in this case, we have about 10,500 candidates who don't have consent. And we can, of course, send them a survey. These surveys are pre-built, so you can, of course, tweak them however you need to, but you don't need to start from scratch. And that can either be like a very plain text style email, so it looks and feels quite personal, or the more branded approach. And again, you can preview what those look like too. What we can also do at this point as well, from a maintenance perspective, is give candidates the option to pull their information out of Bullhorn as well. So they can opt out, they can request to be deleted, they can remove their details, that sort of thing, covering the base in terms of allowing them that option. Or of course, they can follow through the survey and provide consent, which is also a fantastic point to re-engage with existing candidates and capture new skills and categories from them. From a maintenance point of view, however, again, once we've got this consent, you'll have a very similar automation, however, a different approach in terms of how you filter them. And again, in this case, what we have is a similar automation with a different audience at the top here. And what we have is consent maintenance, allowing us to filter on a different sort of topic. So again, they either do or don't have consent in a particular field here. So again, it could be a certain status of consent or a certain purpose. And you might add further sorts of options to that. So again, you can either say they have it or they haven't answered a particular survey in the last year or 6 months, however long that may be. What we can also do at this point, once we've found those candidates in the system with expiring consent, is actually notify people internally as to what's going on. So again, a lot of the time, you'll have these emails kind of being sent out to candidates, and they'll just manage their own consent as they need to. But if you ever needed consultants internally to understand what was going on, maybe you wanted like a weekly roundup email, for example, you can do that with Herefish as well. And in this case, what we're doing is just sending a notification email to the associated record owner. So again, you might just get a weekly roundup. Hey, here are your 10 candidates with expiring consent that haven't done the survey yet. So again, you might need to get in touch with them. You might want to archive them, whatever that kind of next step may be. And of course, you can add your own stages around this process as well. So in this case, we're just sending a survey, again, either a plain text or a nice and graphical version. But you can also, of course, click on the little plus button and add your own stages in here as well. And again, if the volume's a bit lower, you might add a task in there. It might be a good time for a consultant to actually pick up the phone and re-engage with that candidate. You've got all their contact details available. Why not take advantage of that? But of course, you can reach out with the usual methods via email, surveys, and of course, SMS as well. Fantastic. Again, with these automations, you can, of course, either build them from scratch or utilize what we call the blueprint, which is kind of like that templated automation. And that, of course, allows you to get started with this process. You can then embed those different stages into various automations that you already have today, which again is a nice and easy way to get up to speed with Herefish as quickly as possible. With that, I'm going to hand back over to Eric, who's going to summarize what we've just run through today. And I think we probably have a few questions in the chat we want to cover off as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Jordi, if you can go back to the recap slide. One thing that I just wanted to add in there as well, when we talk about maintaining consent and capturing that on a regular basis from our candidates, we can be creative in that approach as well. We can be sending anniversary emails to those candidates, right? Hey, it's been a year or 2 years since we've been working together. Congrats, it's been a pleasure working with you and guiding you through your journey and your career growth. Would you mind updating your details because we want to continue reaching out to you with the most relevant opportunities? So you can strategically input that GDPR consent into other content that you might be pushing out their way as well. We can be very creative with how we're managing this. So quick recap. What we found out, GDPR is hard, right? It can be complex. It can be a very manual and difficult to track process. But as we saw earlier on, it doesn't really need to be. We can leverage automation and rely on it to help us keep our data clean and up to date while remaining compliant. By leveraging automation, you can update, you can capture, and you can maintain that consent straight from the source consistently and reaching out to them at the right time with the trigger points. And because this is automated and running in the background, it's reducing the space for human error in terms of somebody forgetting to reach out to those candidates. And it's taking all that manual effort away from your consultants. And that's essentially giving them back that valuable time that they can now focus to be more productive and spend it on other things and provide a greater experience to your candidates and clients. Okay, so a bunch of questions. Let's have a look here. Is GDPR an add-on or part of the Herefish product? It is. Herefish is GDPR is part of the Herefish full license. If you want to learn more about that, reach out to your account manager and they can guide you through it and we can book you in for a detailed demo as well. We have a question from Peter. Can you automate MPS for candidates using Herefish? Absolutely. You can automate MPS surveys to both candidates and clients by leveraging Herefish, and that can be done across different stages in the sales journey, in the recruitment journey as well. It could be post interview, could be post placements. You could have recurring NPS service being pushed out to your clients as well. I would recommend for this, book out some time with your account manager, and we can guide you through a detailed demo and how you can leverage automation for NPS. Okay, what else do we have? Okay, Jordan, question for you. How does it link with Bullhorn job board managers like Idibu when candidates hit Bullhorn from a multi-poster?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when it comes to job boards, it really depends on how they are feeding into Bullhorn. If it's coming through an integration, we can typically pick up from the source of that application and decide on how we want that to operate. Again, it could be legitimate interest, or it could be express consent through an email. Based on that application coming into Bullhorn, it is the trigger point for us to take that action. It's really up to you on what you want it to do at that point, but we can differentiate if the candidates are coming from different sources, like an Idibu job board post, for example, and take action accordingly.
Great. Can Herefish anonymize candidates in Bullhorn, and can candidates select this as an option through a survey? So you can embed this answer as part of a survey, absolutely. As for anonymizing candidates in Bullhorn through Herefish, I would advise you connect with your account manager to have that conversation in a little bit more detail. A very common practice that we see is if you have similar requests or you want to embed this into a survey, have as a next step for Herefish to add them against the hot list and send an internal notification to the relevant stakeholders in the business so they can take the relevant action. This is considered a high value activity. So you really want a human involvement when it comes to anonymizing records or deleting records from the system.
Hi, Rick. I can just see there's a question from Charlotte around clarification on when consent needs to be updated. Mm-hmm. Our understanding is that you can, as long as the lawful basis is not too far removed from your original lawful basis, then you don't need to update it. However, there is sort of best practice guidance that you can update it to another lawful basis in that scenario that you've just given in order to be sort of completely complete. But as part of that, you do need to gain express consent again from the candidate or client to say, we are now treating you as a contract, and I'd like to update your consent as part of that. So again, it's all part of making sure you update and acknowledge to the candidate or client the changes in consent that you're offering to them. But our understanding is that you don't have to do that because it's not too much of a jump from legitimate interest to a contract. But as we said at the very beginning, please get legal advice or look at the ICO website for any further clarification on that.
Great, thank you, Liam.
Just want to hear from Chris around Herefish working with S-Release and or Novo. It will work with either, it's fine. I would definitely recommend upgrading to Novo, but it will work just fine. So no issues there.
We have another question as to how does it work with importing candidates via LinkedIn? Joe, do you want to take that as well?
Yeah, Herefish itself won't scrape candidates down from LinkedIn. You can import candidates via the LinkedIn RSC integration, which we have. And once candidates are in the system, you can, of course, then treat them as a normal candidate through Herefish. So again, sending out surveys or assuming consent, that sort of thing. The method for getting a candidate from LinkedIn into Bullhorn, however, is not something that Herefish will do and will not automate. But once they're in Bullhorn, then you can take them down any of these journeys, which we've spoken about today.
Okay, we have a couple questions around pricing for Herefish. Absolutely connect with your account manager to have a deeper discussion around pricing and first thing we need to do, of course, is schedule you in for a discovery and a demo so we can truly expand on your needs when it comes to automation.
There's one around the revoking of consent. Is Herefish able to speak to other integrations like TextUs, for example? Absolutely. Typically, those other partners that we have, like TextUs or Cloud Call or similar, they will read off the candidate in Bullhorn. So if they're unsubscribed in Bullhorn, if they are opted out, for example, in Bullhorn, it will reflect in those platforms. Again, that's probably a question we want to speak to you in a little bit more detail about to understand your entire tech stack and just to make sure you are covered. But yeah, if you are using marketplace partners of Bullhorn that are reading your Bullhorn database, then that's absolutely fine.
Okay, we had another question. If you have to transfer your database from another CRM to Bullhorn, what would be the most efficient way to make sure that consent is automatically registered for everyone?
There's a couple similar questions in the panel here that talk about the volume or kind of doing a big data cleanse across the entire database. What we can do effectively on day one is actually run a process very similar to what I showed in terms of like a candidate welcome email, or maybe just a capture consent email and send it to the entire database. It can support that, whether it's 5,000 candidates or 100,000 candidates. The approach is obviously up to you, but we can support that. We can get that survey in front of the right people and push that information back into Bullhorn, so there's no concerns around the volume. It's very common for clients who are going on to Herefish to run a few sorts of starter automations, like a data cleanse across the candidate and the client side, tidy up the jobs and capture GDPR consent from everyone. So again, a very common question we get, a very common process that our clients run through. And if you were looking to kind of take that first step into, cleansing the entire database, capturing consent for the entire database, I understand there would be some concerns around maybe sending that many emails at once, but it's not a question we haven't had before, and we'd be happy to speak to you in a bit more detail about it.
We have another question. Is it possible to attach IDs, passports back into the candidate record via Herefish? At the moment, it just comes back into email. So with Herefish specifically, no. The only thing that you can parse in through Herefish surveys is the CV of that candidate. So we can parse in the information and update that profile. When it comes to capturing documents from candidates, that's an onboarding experience. We do have an onboarding product as well. I would suggest you connect with your account manager and we can start off that conversation when it comes to capturing and putting documents back into the system. Okay. Did I miss anything? Let's see. Does Herefish allow you to set up scheduled data cleanse automations that do not involve sending messages externally?
Yep, absolutely. Again, a very common one for entities that perhaps you don't have communication details for, like a phone number or an email address, very old candidates, jobs that maybe have been kind of kicking around for a number of years and never really went anywhere. Very, very popular use case for automation. Doesn't necessarily have to be like an email chain that goes out or anything like that. You can just set up parameters around automation to say, look, if a job is, a week or two past its start date, or if a candidate's been sitting in the system with no communication and no contact details, just archive them. There doesn't always have to be an email involved. You can just tell Herefish to tidy stuff up for you and it will do it. And that can also just sit there and maintain that as well. So again, using the kind of old candidate example, if you add a candidate today and in 3 years you haven't spoken to them, Herefish can just sit there in the background and look out for candidates or jobs or clients who hit that criteria and take a change. So you don't necessarily have to tell Herefish to do it every year. It just sits there in the background and listens out for these sorts of events and takes action as it needs to. But again, we can show you a whole lot more in terms of data cleansing across the database in a more of a tailored demo for you.
That's great. Thank you, Jordi. I think we're at time now. Can you just move on to the next slide?
Yeah, absolutely.
That'll be the final one. Okay, we might have a couple questions that were left unanswered. We'll go through them and reach back out to you guys and give you an update. In terms of next steps, if you want to learn more about GDPR, GDPR automations or Herefish in general, make sure you reach out to your account manager and we can book some time with you. If you're new to Bullhorn, as a whole, you can email us at sales@bullhorn.com or just visit our website, and we'll be happy to connect with you and discuss an overall solution for your business. And with that, thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Jordi,
guys.
Liam, thank you guys as well.
Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.